know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we choose 1 year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss. Patreon.com/punklautopod is where you can go to get access to all of our weekly bonus audio. And last week we did a bracketology on the albums released in 1994, which will pertain very heavily to this week's episode. We heard you liked brackets, so you get your fill over there on the Patreon. Some pretty important records from 94 that we stacked up against each other. You can also check out the final episode in my Pinback Challengeography series. I finally completed the Pinback discography, and you can listen to the entire series of that as well. I thought about just putting them all together as one big piece of audio, too. It'd probably be like a 2.5 hour piece of audio if I did that way. But it would be nice just to have it all in one place so you don't have to go searching for back episodes of it. And I'll be starting my series on Joan Jett and the Blackhearts shortly. So looking forward to getting started on another series of that. And you may even have the March record roundup by the time this episode goes up, or it'll be shortly after. Not entirely sure. But lots and lots of bonus content over there on the Patreon, all for $1. And if you do our one-time $10 donation, you can choose the album we devote an entire episode to. We have another one of those coming up shortly, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, all the plugging there away for the Patreon. This week's episode, we are talking about an album from the year 1994. Let's look at the other albums from 94 that we have previously covered. So the last time we did 1994, we discussed Spark Markers, Parts and Accessories. Speaking of Patreon sponsored episodes, that was sponsored by our good buddy Jason W., who runs Songs About Chocolate and Girls Substack. And right before that, we did Prairie Home Invasion by Jello Biafra and Mojo Nixon, another Patreon sponsored episode. That one by Dave Brown of One Band, Five Songs.
Our patrons like the year 94.
Yeah, apparently. And then we go way back to episode 73, where we did Madball's Set It Off and Melt Banana's Hedgehog with the Steve Doesn't.
Interesting, yeah.
And even further back at episode 35, we did Focused Bow and Shotmakers Believe In. So
1994, a massive year for punk. And we have not touched any of the important records
yeah,
people associate with that year. We've gone deep cuts every time.
Madball being like the most well-known out of all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is quite funny that
and
there wasn't...
it's second string, though, still.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny how how that's happened so far. I'm surprised at how big of a gap we had, too, between episodes. We went like almost 100 episodes between the Madball one and the Jello Biafra one. So I don't know. I don't know why we've not hit 1994 that many times. Because it's like a huge year. It's like one of the biggest years for punk in the 90s.
Yeah. Which you can hear us talk about many of those huge records on the Patreon. So
yeah,
we're not going to go too in depth on any of that.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. So we'll avoid repeating ourselves on those, and we'll just talk about stuff that we really haven't mentioned on the show here from 1994 right here. And
what did you consider?
You want to go
Let's start
the consideration route. So I pulled 94 because we really haven't done that much of it, and everything we did do was deep cuts. And I again was like, maybe I'll go deep cuts. So I had I had 5 I pulled. The 5th one is the one we're talking about today. But I did consider 4 by Danzig, the 4th album. We actually do talk about that on the bracketology episode. But I didn't say in that. The reason why I was considering 4 so strongly is because I do find something really interesting about talking about the not that one, but the one next to it. So whereas most people will probably be like first Danzig 1 or Danzig 2, or probably the 2 that are like the best records, I do find it interesting to talk about the ones that are, next to it and are good, but maybe not necessarily the one that people go to that often. So that's why I was thinking of 4. But ultimately, I passed it up because I think Danzig 3 is the better record and also fits that criteria of not the big one to talk about.
Yeah. 4 is the most not that one you can go.
Yeah.
Without getting into like really not that one.
Yeah.
Because the string of records immediately following 4 are just like, what? Why? Records that those may have to be like Halloween episodes. So I feel like it's the only time we can really justify listening to them.
But yeah, I think 3 is just a stronger album and a little shorter. And also not the
And
main one.
And it doesn't have Sadistical on it.
Yeah.
Which is a really bad song.
I also considered Wait by the Rollins Band, which we also talked about on our bracketology, so won't really spend much time on that one, but that is the record with Liar on it, if you're unfamiliar with the albums. So here are 2 that I really was considering. I thought about doing Dixie by Avail. We have yet to do Avail on the show, which I feel like there are a lot of bands we've yet to cover on this show. For some reason, we've yet to hit like really big key bands.
Like we haven't done a Weaker Than's album.
Yeah. We did a John Kay record.
Yeah.
But yeah, Avail, important and very important band, especially for the Ordcore sound. But ultimately the reason why I decided against this one was, one, I didn't necessarily want to do the one called Dixie, just because, the negative connotation of that word. But even then, like I thought about Avail records and I was like, I still probably would rather do Over the James or even 4 a.m. Friday over Dixie. So
yeah, that's kind of where I would go with it, because I think I wouldn't be opposed to talking about Dixie because of the title. I think that it's an interesting record to talk about Avail in the context of where they came from, in the context of like being a Southern punk band and what that means, and what like a lot of the language that you hear used and see used a lot in the South, like you don't challenge. It takes a while for you to really realize what it means because it's just so commonplace. And I think that could be something to analyze within the context of like a punk band, and Avail particularly as a band, because it's rumored to have done stuff with Confederate flags. I don't know that was I can't find really solid confirmation of them using Confederate flags ever, but
like in merch or stuff like that.
Yeah, or just like having them. I don't know,
on the stage.
On stage, or I don't know. I don't know what this story is. I've seen that mentioned somewhere, but I really can't find any real confirmation of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know who Avail are. They're train hopping punks from Richmond, and they're definitely like not racists, and like
yeah. Avail's actions have definitely outweighed any minor hiccups in poor decision making. So
yeah,
they have a good track record for the most part. So yeah, I wouldn't have been too worried about that. But just from an album's stance, it's not my favorite, but it is part of that trilogy of like really great Avail records. So, but to me, it's like the third best of those.
Yeah, it is. It's not quite as good as they would be.
And the other record I was strongly considering was The Last by Leatherface, which at the time was considered it was going to be their last record. I don't know the exact timeline as far as they took like a hiatus at one point in the 90s, and then I think they come back with Dog Disco and Horsebox. I don't even know how big of a break it really was at the time, but it's a great record. I mean, all of Leatherface's albums are great. There's not a bad Leatherface album, so it would have been very easy to discuss that album. But we've done Mush, before, and so I wasn't in a hurry to like run back to do another Leatherface record. But if you were given the year 1994, what albums would you consider?
Oh man, 94. I mean, at this point, looking back at what we haven't touched, like I'd probably be inclined to do something pretty classic, but I could also like throw it out to like something very outside the box and do like Ill Communication by Beastie Boys, which is very minimally punk, but it's certainly has some moments on it that nod to their hardcore roots, and I think it's a good record. and I think it's of interest to punk, so could be one that would be fun to do. Stranger Than Fiction by Bad Religion is a really good record. I guess the question is that the one to repeat Bad Religion for? Maybe not.
It could be. It's the major label record,
But I think I might like Recipe for Hate more.
Yeah.
The one before it.
Yeah, and was that on a major? Was Recipe for Hate on a major?
I don't think so. I think that was still on Epitaph. Well, Epitaph / Atlantic. So I guess it was kind of like, I think there's like an Atlantic. They were signed to Atlantic, but they were still obligated to Epitaph kind of situation, to where like Atlantic did some distribution and the Epitaph was like the main release, but then fully on Atlantic on Stranger Than Fiction. We could be cynical and try to be part of the zeitgeist and talk about a Jesus Lizard record, since they have a new album coming out.
I did not know that.
Talk about Down. Yeah, that's a weird one. I'm surprised they have a new album coming, but
Jesus Lizard are an interesting band. I would like to do them one day. I guess they're just not like high on my list of priorities albums to get to.
Yeah, I don't love them.
Yeah.
A great record that would be really fun to talk about would be Life, Love, Regret by Unbroken. That's one of the more important metalcore records of all time, maybe. Is that a big statement?
I'd say it's definitely really important for the evolution of metalcore's sound, for sure. It's probably one of the earliest like records that you would even like outright call metalcore too.
Yeah. It defines the late 90s, early 2000s pre At the Gates riffs style metalcore. More so than Earth Crisis or most of the other early metalcore bands. It's the difference between what we would have called metallic hardcore and what we would have called metalcore as teenagers, when you're making those kinds of unnecessary, really detailed distinctions between subgenres. I don't know. Like we said, go sign up for the Patreon to hear what we say about a lot more of the. Okay, I'll throw this one out there because I think this record's fucking great. Flame Job by the Cramps. That's a fun record. I would be very tempted to do that, because we've done the Cramps in the past, but there's a very big difference between early Cramps and later Cramps. I think that's a band that's worth revisiting their later material.
And I guess just to give you an idea of what else was going on outside of the world of punk music, we got Illmatic by Nas. We have Dummy by Portishead.
Yeah.
We have The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails. Grace by Jeff Buckley. Crooked Rain by Pavement. Ready to Die by Notorious B.I.G. Super Unknown by Soundgarden.
1994 is, it's a big year for music in general.
Yeah.
It's not just punk, but.
Definitely Maybe by Oasis. Yeah. Definitely just like a really big year in general. Well, let's get into the album that we are actually talking about today. So, I got 1994 and I selected Magnified by Failure. Stats on the band. Failure were from Los Angeles, California. They formed in the year 1990. And this album was released March 8th, 1994 on Slash Records. This is the band's second full-length album, and the personnel on this record is Greg Edwards on bass, guitar, and drums, and Ken Andrews on vocals, guitar, and bass. The album was produced by the band and was recorded by Paul Lanny, and there are some additional drums by John Dargahi on tracks 1, 2, 6, and 7. So we'll get into more of the story later, but so we'll just start with why I selected this record. Because a couple weeks ago, you and I were talking. I don't remember the reason for the conversation, how we got on this topic.
But you sent. I remember. You sent me a screenshot of someone on Twitter saying, which now this is a thing that we do. We just send each other screenshots of people on Twitter saying something's underrated that isn't. Someone posting Silent Planet by Failure saying that it was underrated, or it's like a record that never really got the credit that it deserves. And you were like, it has. It has definitely gotten, it's almost a little bit overrated.
Yeah, this comes back to my people really need to learn the definition of underrated, because that was the thing. It was like, people don't really talk about this record. And I'm like, have you not been paying attention to the internet for the last decade? Because people haven't shut up about that record.
Yeah.
An entire wave of music came about because of that record in the last decade.
Yeah.
And anyway, that kind of spun out of me saying, and I've also don't think I've ever heard a single song by Failure, but I knew exactly what they sounded like. And this, you were incredulous and like, how have you not heard anything by Failure? And I don't know how I've gotten away with not hearing any Failure. Like, I've never been curious enough to go out of my way to listen to them, primarily because of the type of bands who cited them as an influence. I find some of the most boring music in the world. We'll get into that later. And I already knew what Hum sounded like, and I'd heard Hum songs, and so I was like, it's that kind of thing. It's that thing. I don't need to hear this. And I guess my curiosity never got the better of me when it came to that band. So that's why I just had never listened to anything they'd done before. And then looking at the year 1994 and seeing this album on the list, I was like, is this it? Is this where I break the seal on listening to a Failure and like actually see what they're about? And then you mentioned, hey, there's an anniversary about this record, which we just passed this month. The anniversary of the record came out 30 years ago this month. So I was like, okay, good. We have a good timing. We have a good discussion tying into it. We've got, it's a big record. They have two more really important records. One's probably more so than the other, but that was also another thing I asked you. I was like, should we do this one or should we wait and do the other album?
Yeah. I think my thinking, and this kind of goes into like you're considering, Danzig 4 as being, sometimes it's interesting to talk about the one that's not the one. And I think my thinking, and I kind of pushed lightly towards this record, was that this isn't the one, but it is one to talk about. And I think my memory of it was that I liked it more than Fantastic Planet. I thought it was a better record. I think that's a hot take, I guess. I know that's a hot take.
I guess then I can ask you, because I have no history with this band Failure. Do you have a history with the band Failure? What, where do they go for you? What did you know prior to this episode?
My recollection of listening to Failure, being introduced to Failure, it goes back to, this is probably 10 years ago, around the time of their reunion, because they came back. They had a record in 2015. That's probably about the first time I ever listened to Failure, was in 2015. It was like, okay, I've seen this band before, talked about as being a fairly important band. Now they're back around the same time as like a lot of the shoegaze revival happening. And that was the time period where there were a lot of bands doing hum worship. It's what we call it. And a lot of the new gaze stuff. I think it all just like properly should be categorized as like pedal board rock. So that was really big. Also, interestingly enough, around that same time period where people were citing, a lot of hardcore was citing Quicksand influence. So I would have listened to Quicksand kind of a little more intently around that time period. But I think around the same time, I was also deep diving into like Seaweed and Superchunk, and even like going deeper with like Jawbox and I guess a lot of different stuff that have become more mainstays. And Failure didn't really stick. It was like, it was pretty good. I like this, but they didn't really get into any regular listening, to the point where I really don't think I've listened to, like, I probably listened to a few of their records. We'll probably listen to the first 3 records in 2015, and then like maybe heard a handful of songs later. Maybe in recent years, I've kind of gone back to some of the records as I've been working through my repeating calendar system, but never, yeah, they never seemed, I guess going back to the tweet that instigated our whole, like, they're overrated conversation, like, never have they come across to me as a band that needed to be a household name.
Based on their merits? Like, you think they weren't good enough to become household names? Is that kind of what you're saying there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they were, yeah, they just, in my head, they never did anything that I felt like should be necessary for everyone to go listen to. Like, certainly, if you're interested in that sound, that's a band to listen to. But that being said, I did like them more than Hum, if that's the closest comparison to make.
And we'll get into it. I don't think they're that close. Not as close as people act like they were.
Yeah.
I think there's other bands they're closer to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. A little bit of the backstory of the band. They were a band formed via classifieds. So Ken and Greg meet. They start trading ideas immediately for songs. They add a drummer, Robert Gauss, to the band. And they start playing around in LA, doing shows, gigging around. They kind of click pretty much immediately. Due to these live shows, they eventually get signed to Slash Records. And Slash is probably most famously known for being featured prominently in the Decline of Western Civilization documentary that we discussed on a Masterpunk Theater. But they're one of the labels that's talked to in there. And so in 1992, they go and record their first record, Comfort, with Steve Albini. And they weren't happy with the finished product of Comfort. They wanted to be more involved in the mixing of the record. They also wanted a bigger production sound instead of Albini's more like trying to capture them live production style, which I get. Albini has a very specific style, and he does want to try and make it seem as live as possible. And listening to this record, I can see why they're like, no. We want this to be very well produced and like really big sounding. So yeah, I get it. They wanted different things out of it, and I could see that's why they were.
And at that time, they maybe wouldn't have known.
Yeah,
that Albini's not the guy to do that.
Yeah, in '92. Yeah, like
when you think of Albini Productions, I can't think of anyone that is known for recording with him that have a big sound other than like Neurosis. And you realize, oh, that's because that's what Neurosis sounded like in the room. Like, they just sounded huge, and he captured that. And if you can't go into the room as a band and be that big, you're not going to sound that big.
Which, depending on the type of band, like, it's fine, because then you can do the more dynamic sounding stuff. But I think they wanted to sound huge. They wanted to sound big. Yeah. And if they can't fill that specific room, then yeah, it's not going to come across in the studio. But also, yeah, it could be one of those cases of they thought it sounded good while they were recording it, and then when it was finished in the mix, they were just like, I wish it was bigger, that kind of thing. So after that record, they followed that up with a tour with the band Tool, which feels early to me, but I guess Tool were big in 92. Yeah. Tool, I guess, feel a little bit more ahead of their time than I realized.
Yeah, they are. I think that's why they became so important.
Yeah.
I think it took rock radio a while to catch up to Tool.
Yeah. So the band then goes into the studio for their next record, and they wanted to be their own producers this time around. Slash was like, okay, that's cool. You can do it. Midway through the sessions, though, drummer Robert Gauss left the band. So Greg Edwards decides to take up the drums on the record, and then they get John Dargahi to play on a couple tracks. I guess to do some stuff that he can't do himself.
Yeah.
Because while they're both multi-instrumentalists, they're both guitar and bass players. I don't think drumming was like his number one thing that he did. So yeah, get a little help to come in there and finish up. And then after finish the record, they wind up bringing in drummer Kelly Scott, who then stays with the band throughout the rest of their 90s. So, and then they go back on tour with Tool again. Very funnily, they tour with Tool a lot. When they came back, when they reunited, they toured with Tool again.
Huh.
And they've done projects with, I think they brought in one of the guitarists of Tool to play live with them on the last like run of Failure, like the original 90s run of Failure. And then they had like a side project with the other guitar player from Tool. One of the people in Failure winds up playing in A Perfect Circle.
Oh,
Greg and Ken, I'm not sure which one it was, winds up playing in Pucifer. They are like tight with Tool.
they're Tool. That's weird.
I was just like, when I read that, I was like, it kind of makes sense in the context of the 90s why they would be tight. Very different sounding bands. And they're not like, Failure's not tight with the type of bands that you would expect them to be, because they were, classified band formed. So they're not from a scene. They're just musicians who played together. So I just found it very interesting that I guess Tool took a chance on them early on, and then they just kept working with each other over the years. So very weird. Yeah. Very weird. And then, yeah, the rest is kind of history. They do their next record, they break up, and then reunite a decade later. Yeah, this record is basically two people.
Yeah.
It's a two-man band at this stage. They lost their drummer. They got a drummer after the record's done. They got a little help in studio. That I was surprised with. I did not know that this was such a slim one. I don't think I realized they were just a trio. A lot of trios in the 90s. So many trios in the 90s. But yeah, definitely weird. A weird band. Well, weird band in the sense that when they are coming out, the type of music they're playing, you think they would have more in common with bands like Quicksand or Jawbox or something like that. But really, they don't know those guys. They didn't seem like they even knew them. They probably met later, but just LA musician dudes who just got together to play. Very unique.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and they're an LA band. I mean, that's weird to me. I feel like Failure is a Midwest band.
It feels like it, right? It feels like it should be a Midwest band.
They feel like they should be an Illinois band. I mean, and Hum was from Champaign, so
I did also want to mention what else was going on with Slash in 1994. That year, they released albums by Grantley Buffalo, L7, Soul Coughing, and Faith No More.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the kind of label Slash was at this point. It's like...
Not where you expect Failure to be.
Yeah. Failure had... Slash had good distribution. They had Warner Brothers distribution at that time. Though on the next record, the deal would end between Warner and Slash. And Fantastic Planet was basically, like, shelved until they could find distribution. And then, like, I think the band finally talked Warner into doing the distribution for that record. So that's the last record Warner distributed for Slash. Weird that Failure is the band that they did that for. Because, like, okay, let's talk about this. Failure. I'd never even heard of this band until everyone decided to start citing them as influences alongside Hum. Like, I don't think they sold very well. They didn't have very many singles. There's like a video for the song Undone that got no radio play, or no radio play and very little MTV play. Probably like played on 120 minutes once or twice. But how did everyone, when I saw people starting to be like, oh, I love Failure, I'm like, you're a liar. You don't know who that band is. Like, nobody knows who Failure is. You just saw Hum, and on Last FM, the similar artist next to them was Failure, so you went to them to listen to. Like, they didn't sell well. They didn't have radio play. They didn't have TV play.
Yeah. Failure is a band that is cited as a reference, but it's like the Wikipedia notation sometimes you see on references that people put into an article that they don't have like a site, a source to back up what they're saying, and it'll be like who with a question mark. It's like who was citing Failure as an influence. This is, I think, is it Caden?
So listening to this record, I was definitely going, all right, I hear lots of Stephen Brodsky on this. Like, vocally, there's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah.
Musically, like, Cave-In's a very riff heavy band. And so, yeah, to me, Cave-In is probably the one who was telling people about Failure. It's one of those, like, I really like this band Failure. And I could see somebody in 1994 who liked Slash records and liked what they were putting out. If you liked L7 and Faith No More at the time, maybe you took a chance on this Failure band getting into them. And then in 96, doing the same thing. Like, Hum put out that record, You'd Prefer an Astronaut, in 95. So, like, if you liked Hum and you heard a Hum song on the radio and you're like, that sounds cool, and you get the record, you really like that, I could see how you could stumble across Failure in the 90s. It was, yeah, definitely the people later who were like, we're inspired by Hum and Failure. It's like, I mean, yeah, you could be inspired by those records, but like, you came to Failure and Hum, probably Hum too, like, well after everyone else had ever like was listening to them in the 90s. So yeah, it probably could be Cave-In being the one that's like that carried the candle forward for people to learn about Failure. But really, it was all the emo guys. It was all the emo guys who decided they were like, we're gonna do this sound now, which I still don't know how they got on Hum. Like, to me, the influence of Hum and Failure in the 2010s is very confusing to me, in that how did that get there? It must have been like,
I don't know.
People found it and were like, I really like this record, and like they just I don't know. It's a weird thing. I don't understand that.
It's a little bit of rival schools. It's a little bit of Cave-In. I mean, in my head, it really is a succession of like Hum, Failure to Cave-In to, and even like Cave-In and, Code 7 doing a Cave-In style space rock record. And, there's just a certain kind of like hardcore guy that just like
is that
wants
it?
to stop screaming.
Yeah. Because even Telescreen, which I guess is a Code 7 spinoff band too.
Yeah. The
Drawn Brothers, getting the classic Case guy in there.
Yeah.
So I guess, okay, there is a pipeline. The emo guy to space rock guy. There is a pipeline. It's just indirect. It's not like the route you'd expect them to go.
And I think the Hum worship stuff and the shoegaze, new gaze stuff being around the same time and a lot of those reunions happening at the same time I think they're directly related. I think it's shoegaze being more of the root of it and people exploring that genre, and then also just kind of like looking around. It's like, wow, there's kind of a lot of other like effects heavy, spacey, ambient, kind of rock stuff from the 90s that's interesting, and people going from there. Which also, speaking of like space rock as a genre, like we need to decide what it is.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot of things, right?
I mean, I think I say that. I think we have decided what space rock is. It's a sound that is not very consistent with the origins of space rock, or even the origins of space rock revival, because Spiritualized and Spaceman 3, don't really sound like Space Hog. But I think space rock as a genre itself too, like you can go back and be like, well, Hawkwind and David Bowie aren't really very similar at all. Both have gotten the term space rock. So
yeah, I feel like space rock is more an aesthetic than a distinct set of sounds.
Yeah,
that's how you can be like Man or Astro Man, and this.
Yeah, but that's the thing with Failure. You think of them as a space rock band because they have the spaceship on the album cover on the third album.
Yeah, so that was one thing I wanted to bring up. So Failure are classified as a space rock band a lot of times. And listening to this record, it's not that spacey. It's really not.
No.
Now, Fantastic Planet, like I think even lyrically, there's a lot of space themes in their lyrics going from Fantastic Planet to like the reunion stuff. Though they did say in like after their last record came out, they said, we're no longer going to be incorporating space elements in our music going forward. So they are now rejecting space rock as their sound, which listening to this record, I don't hear a ton of space rock. There's some riffs, like the higher riffs that they do in a couple of songs. Like that's probably the closest you get. Listening to this record, this is a post-hardcore record. This feels way more in common with Quicksand and Jawbox at the time. Like this feels like, the space is very limited in this record. Now maybe Fantastic Planet is more spacey than this one, but
it is. They also do like the segues, which Cave In would copy that directly, which is why I think Cave In is the ones that kept Failure relevant culturally.
And by the way, why did all the space rock revival bands not refer to Cave In at all as a reference? They don't. Cave In is never brought up as an influence on those bands.
Yeah.
Is it because
it's too obvious?
Is that what it is? Is too obvious? Or is it because they can't play guitar as well? Because I assume it's mostly Stephen Brodsky's guitar playing on those records. Because he's a Mutoid Man. He's doing very similar stuff there. They can't play like him.
Yeah.
And they can't sing like him either. I mean, maybe they're just not listening to him. But I feel like they're missing out if they're not listening to Cave In and you're playing space rock.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen Brodsky's voice is like, how are you that kind of vocalist? How are you that extreme of a hardcore vocalist to then be able to sing like that?
Is that what all the people are like? Beyond Hypothermia is the only Cave In I care about.
Yeah,
is that what it is?
There's a bit of the space rock Cave In stuff being somewhat rejected, but
I think if you were borrowing more from Cave In, your music would be more interesting. Because all these space rock bands, they forget the best part of the bands that they're citing as influences are the riffs. They don't have the riffs. None of them have the riffs.
They don't. Failure had some riffs.
Oh, yeah. I was listening to... Okay, so we haven't really talked about this record at all. I really liked it. I think it's a really good record. Like, I love the guitar playing on this record. I like that his singing is higher and not just like, I'm a bored singer like this. I think Hum actually does have a little bit more of the bored vocals.
Yeah, they do.
So I think he's a better singer. I think he's a better singer than Walter in Quicksand. Honestly, I think I like this record better than Slip by Quicksand. I think there's better riffs. I think there's better singing. I guess Quicksand has a little bit more groove. A little more groove to it. But But there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of strong bass grooves on this record too. But yeah, I really enjoyed this record to the point where I'm like, oh, I get why everybody cites them, but like they're missing it. They're not doing it right.
So the thing, okay. So I was like, it's been a while since I've listened to Failure. I know I had heard the first three records, and Fantastic Planet probably the most recent that I've listened to. So going into this, I was like, well, let me refamiliarize myself with all of the Failure stuff. I listened to Comfort, the first record.
Oh yeah.
So I started with that one, and I was just like, whoa, way more Quicksand than I remembered. And then I did Magnified, and I was like, this was like the last one, but better. And then I started on Fantastic Planet, and I was like, oh, they dropped the ball.
Oh.
Maybe I was just tired from overexposure at that point. But, they couldn't compel me to keep listening. The segues are annoying. Yeah, I ended up not really finishing that record. I got about halfway through it. I was just like, I'm just not feeling this. The songs aren't as strong. The grooves aren't as strong. The riffs aren't as good. They're leaning into that spacier sound, and I don't think that they actually. Yeah, I think people latched onto that part of Failure. It's like, but those first two records are great.
That's interesting. That's the acclaimed one. Like, I mean, they're both actually pretty evenly regarded. They're very closely regarded. One is just, more popular than the other. So I guess that means, yeah, they leaned harder into the space elements, and maybe that's the off-putting part to you. I mean, I don't know. I love when Cave In, their space stuff. But yeah, different elements of that band.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I put the record on. It's a little long. It's a 49-minute album.
Yeah.
It's 1994. We're in CD bloat era though, so could be worse for sure. First song comes on, Let It Drip. Good groove. The thing I didn't like about that song was it had like reverb on the vocals, like a lot of reverb on the vocals, and then like that backwards sound, that like makes it sound like it's going backwards, reverse, backward match track. But the Twin Peaks, like they spoke backwards to make it sound like you're saying normal, but all the air and breath is wrong.
Yeah.
They had that effect all over that song, and I was like, oh man, they're not that kind of band, are they? Like I hate radio effect voice in songs, or like ultra reverby, making your voice sound like you're coming through a speaker. Like, I hate that kind of vocal effect. And I was really worried that this is going to be one of those records where the vocals sound like that the entire time. Thankfully, they don't. That's like the only song they really do that on. And instead, we have like a pretty, like, he's got a unique voice. He doesn't sound like everyone else. I hear Stephen Brodsky's similarities in the way he sings. So he must have been a fan of this record and his vocals. Like, yeah, definitely. Because once I hit like Moth and Frogs. I'm like, man, these songs are really, really good.
Frogs is so cool. It sounds like something from Your Own Special Sweetheart.
Yeah.
It's a very J. Robbins-y arpeggio, and with that bouncing, like that swingy rhythm too. Do 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 do, like, but it's heavy. It's good. I think there's something really interesting in the way that they're kind of, the two guys are both guitarists and bass players, and they just kind of like, they trade off. It's very it's interesting how they do that, because it seems like there's a democratizing kind of effect, or like there's just like a minimizing of ego, of it being like, well, whoever's got the best idea is the one we're going to use.
Yeah.
It seems to be the mentality.
I love that in a band. Like when people reading that about them, how they would just like, all right, I got an idea, and then it's like, okay, you play it on the record then. Like if it's your idea, you play it on the record. But like trading back and forth guitar and bass. Honestly, reading that, I was like, that's what Pinback does. It's Rob and Zach, and they both just trade guitar and bass throughout the whole album recording process. So they have this, hey, here you go. You wrote it. You play it. You know, it's on the record. You did it. So I like that they have that kind of recording dynamic. They did say live they were more regimented on who plays what, though. It was more of I think I even wrote it down. They say live Greg played bass primarily, and then Ken played guitar mostly. So they were just like, that probably just makes it easier for live shows, and you're not swapping all the time, which Pinback did the same thing too. So yeah, I really like that. Which, what other band did we read about that had a similar dynamic? I feel like we did one not too long ago where it was like the same deal. Oh, the Swerve Driver record. It was very much like just the two of them in the studio. And they I think they even played drums on that record too. Or part of the record.
Yeah. Which, speaking of Pinback, they're San Diego band, right?
Yeah.
Failure really would make more sense as a San Diego band, because if you think about Pinback, you think about Drive Like Jehu, you think about Boilermaker, which I feel like Failure has a lot in common with Boilermaker. Very similar melodies and like just that really tension building. Yeah, you could play me this and tell me they were a San Diego band, and I would believe it.
Yeah, I find it interesting. They're a Craigslist band, for lack of a better term. You know, which is. It's interesting. It's interesting that it works so well, and they're locked in sync with like the type of music that they're playing. Maybe that's really what it was. They got together and they were like, "Oh shit, you like the same stuff I do." Maybe they had similar musical interests, and that's how they were able to, gel so well together so quickly. I don't know who a ton of their influences are though. I know they did a cover of Depeche Mode's "Enjoy the Silence." Yeah, which like the band Depeche Mode like really liked. Like, they loved their version, and I think even one of them, like Andy Sumner in this name in Depeche Mode, he said that their version's better than the Depeche Mode version, which I'd have to hear it, but that's wild. The Depeche Mode's like, shit, this band, they do it better than we do. Like
Andy Fletcher, I think is
Fletcher. Yeah. So it's like, we know they like Depeche Mode, but that doesn't really translate into what they're playing in this band. And they're concurrent with Quicksand, so I doubt Quicksand's an influence. Because Slip came out in 93. They'd already done Comfort in 92. Probably just more parallel thinking there.
I mean, there's probably noise rock stuff and Discord stuff that's kind of in there. Influences.
Yeah, I think people also, when you think of Jawbox, people kind of forget they have a spacey sound too. I guess it's more of like the atmosphere of Jawbox's music, especially in 94 and 90, the next record. I mean, Hum had their records out before Failure as well. So I don't know. They may have been listening to Hum. I don't know. The fact they're so tied to Tool at the time, though, makes me just think that they're just, everything they did was just coincidentally at the same time. They did tour. I think when they reunited, they did tour with Swerve Driver, because that would have been around their reunion too. And that actually makes a lot of sense to me too.
Yeah.
Out of the shoegaze bands. I mean, maybe they just like shoegaze too. That could be part of it.
Yeah. Failure. I mean, listening to these records, like, I don't think there's any single influence. Yeah, I think it really is just a case of two pretty like-minded people who just want to make the best music they can, figuring out how to do that. And they're probably just pulling from a lot of different places. But yeah, this record's good though. Like Bernie sounds like a really good post-grunge song. I almost said that chorus is big. Sounds very much like something that could have been on the radio.
Yeah, that one had some wah guitar in there too. I think Magnified, the title track, is probably my favorite song on the record. Though it does do this thing where like the song just kind of like stops and then turns into just space sounds and acoustic guitars. It's a weird. They do it like twice on the album where they end the song and then they just like turn it into something else for the rest of the track.
Yeah, like the track is 4.5 minutes long. The actual song that is the song Magnified is like under 3 minutes.
Yeah.
They just stop and then they do the little segue.
I wonder if they would have made that a separate track, but the label was like, nah, we're going to do them together. I don't know. I can see that.
Yeah, it is. It's fast, really catchy, really reminds me a lot of Seaweed. Killer riff, too.
I really enjoyed Undone, which was the song they chose to make a music video for. It's a solid little video, too. Very 90s. I liked Wet Gravity. It kind of had like a metal feel to it. And it does the same thing that Magnified does. It just like song stops and then it turns into something else. Like a weird, just noisy sounds and drum distorted. Yeah, very odd. I think Empty Friend is good. I think the album Closer might be the weakest track, Small Crimes. It's just really long. It's like 7 minutes long. It's like a low energy track. It's a closer. Like it feels like an album closer, but it just drags too much for me. Like I definitely think it's the weakest moment of the album. Fortunately, it's the end of the album. So like if you wanted to be done with the album, the track before, you could be, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very expendable. If you're listening to this record in the car and you get to where you're going at like Empty Friend, you're like, well, I'm not gonna pick up where I left off because it's over.
Yeah. I do hear a little Sunny Day Real Estate in here too.
Yeah,
there's a little bit in there, but again, they put their first record out in '94, so they had to be pulling from a similar influence. But yeah, I was thoroughly, the way it starts, I'm like, oh, did I pick a slog? Oh no. Like I was genuinely worried that I was not going to like this record. But then like track 2, it turns it around right away for me. So I'm glad we did this one. Cause like if I didn't like purposely go out of my way to listen to this album, I don't know that I ever would have, you know, because like I said, so many of the bands who claim them as an influence, I find incredibly boring to listen to. And so in my head, I was like, they must be boring too, which they're doing Failure a disservice by citing them so much. And I mean, they don't think their music's boring probably, but I sure do.
Yeah, Comfort is great too. It's very similar to this record.
Have you heard any of the reunion stuff at all?
No, I haven't. I suspect that it's more in line with Fantastic Planet and more in the spacey stuff, but it is all well regarded. Like people who like Failure like those records.
What do people like better? The Hum reunion or the Failure reunion?
I would suspect people like the Failure reunion more. I mean, there's only the one Hum record.
Yeah.
Just like there's the one Quicksand record. And I don't think anybody really cared about it.
No, I think there's 2 Quicksand records now.
Are there 2 reunions records now?
So according to Rate Your Music, from Failure, The Heart is a Monster is a 3.42. In the Future, Your Body is got 3.66, and Wild Type Droid has a 3.52.
I guess people liked that 2021 Quicksand record more than I thought. I just don't remember anyone talking about it.
People gave Inlet, it's got a 3.52, so that's pretty well regarded. Quicksand Interiors is a 3.48, and Distant Populations is 3.42, so slightly less. They do feel like they belong together. Like those 3 bands kind of feel like they belong together. Not just because everyone cites the same 3 bands as influences, but
yeah.
But sonically, there's a lot in common with all their sounds. I do think Helmet also should be in that conversation. They're like on the more metal side, but there's a lot of similarity there too.
Yeah. Helmet just gets passed over because it doesn't feel special to say you're influenced by Helmet, because Helmet like immediately was so influential.
Yeah,
Just
much earlier.
to just be like bands that already had a reputation started ripping on Helmet. It's like Sepultura goes, oh, we're going to do our Helmet record. Napalm Death is like, we're going to do like 3 Helmet records. And then, of course, that leads to new metal.
Yeah, I could see someone in the mid 90s having like Betty and Magnified like in their car together, like on their CD rack together.
Yeah,
very easily though. Same type of person, the type of person who was tired of grunge by 94, who was just like, all right, I like Nirvana, but I'm tired of Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots. I am very curious to see what they do next, especially with that comment of them being like, we're dropping the space from our sound. Like, does that mean the next record is going to sound like Magnified or Comfort?
Maybe.
I can see that being fun. I don't know.
I didn't spend too much time on like Failure's lyrics, but like none of these songs seem like they're about space or anything. They're like quasi, philosophical, somewhat social commentary-ish, vague stuff.
Like most singers from the 90s.
Yeah. So I could see them just being like, I want to sing about real life, not sci-fi. Not that I don't even expect their later records to actually be about spaceships or anything.
Out of curiosity, I did want to see what some of these lyrics are about. I think mental states are kind of what a lot of the lyrics are on this record, because like definitely feel like I heard lyrics in there about like taking pills to keep your brain or something like that. I do remember hearing the opening line of like pear-shaped women melt down sometimes onto concrete and moth.
Yeah.
But like,
well, like the title track is like, I mean, the chorus is Don't Hurt a Fly. They all sang Don't Rape a Girl in Bright May, which, I mean, the whole song is like really chewing on the idea of like sociopathic boys will be boys behavior. Like, because the first verse is about burning ants with a magnifying glass, and second verse is like blowing up dead birds with firecrackers. It's just kind of like you raise men to be shitty, destructive people, and then you have to like clamp down on them as adults. And it's like, well, how'd they get there?
Frogs has the line, "Frogs are hopping off my brainstem."
Yeah.
Which, and the outro of that is, "I've gone away to have my head checked. I guess I need to have it looked at." And it just repeats that over and over again. So that one's another. So mental like health and state, it seems to be like a topic that they go to a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, nothing like really jump out lyrically. So the Undone, it has a line in there I don't understand what he's saying. "Let me come undone in your house. I need to kill some time tonight. Let me come undone in your mouth. I need to know that you're the same." That's the line I kept hearing. I was like, is this song about blowies? What is it?
His name is Greg, right? Yeah. He said, I wrote the lyrics in the chorus. I have no explanation. They're crude and stupid. I think I thought I was being witty and sexy. More likely they fit the phrasing well, and I convinced myself of something that justified leaving them alone.
Okay, so that's kind of what it comes across.
It's interesting for him to like respond to it later and be like, yeah, it wasn't good. It didn't do what I convinced myself I was doing.
That feels like a Stone Temple Pilot lyric.
Yeah.
Like dumb and like,
yeah.
Yeah. And people wonder why I don't care about lyrics. I appreciate good lyrics, but I also think most lyrics are not very good.
Well, yeah. I mean, I really like that annotation of him responding to it later and just being like, yeah, it doesn't actually really mean anything. It fit the
like
phrasing.
How it sounded. Yeah. Well, that too is like, that's probably 75% of songwriting, like lyric writing. You're just really trying to figure out what words to put in place to make it sound good when you sing it.
Yeah. This needs to not be clunky.
Yeah. That's why like a lot of like I used to see this more in like the 2000s with like a lot of the metalcore bands. They would have like longer lyrics, but they would just drop words out of it just to make it fit.
Yeah.
So then it stops actually making sense if you think about what they're saying. But and they publish the lyrics more like they publish their poetry, where you have like the full line that was written, but like Dan Wade would do this all the time, where he'd like have a whole line, but he'd only say 4 of the words in the entire line.
Yeah.
With that, with metal too, like that kind of stuff, like nobody can understand what you're saying anyway, so you can just get away with it, just trying to make it fit. But yeah, let's rate this one. What do you give it?
Maybe like a 3.75. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it now more than I did probably originally. But it's probably not going to rise to the level of coming back to it very often.
I'm gonna give it a 4.0. I enjoyed this quite a bit, and I could see that if I was buying music in 1994 and I was older than I actually was in 1994, not 8. Like if I was like 15 in 1994, I could see really getting into this record and really liking it as far as like it becoming an important album. So I do find during this era of music, we all know like the iconic records and we all know like the scene records and stuff like this. But I do really like the idea of just like we made a really big sounding rock record, but it's not a grunge record and it's not a punk record. It's just kind of like this other thing. It's not metal either. It's like an other thing. I really like the idea of that kind of record. There's probably more of it out there than people realize too, but it just, kind of got buried because it wasn't tied to a scene.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Stavesacre.
Yeah.
I mean, tied to a scene, but not a scene that like where all of the bands sound the same.
Yeah.
Actually, very few of them did.
Yeah, they're an interesting band. They definitely just kind of felt like they were doing their own thing and didn't really think about what else was going on. But yeah, definitely, I get the hype now around Failure. I should listen to Fantastic Planet to see if it has the legs that it didn't for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably worth hearing to know what it's about, which is why I was like surprised that you had never listened to a Failure record. I was like, figured at least that one, the one that gets referenced all the time.
I cannot overstate how badly those bands represented that sound to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the feeling I have towards Quicksand for being constantly cited and being like, these bands don't sound like Quicksand.
Yeah. Missing the riffs, guys. Come on. Well, we got the tone. It's like, yeah, tone is not enough.
But I got a phaser.
Yeah.
You could actually do this without the phaser.
Yeah. And if you sing like that, if you sing like you're bored, I'm bored.
Yeah.
If it's very much like if you're cold, they're cold. If you're bored, I'm bored. Is how that is for me. I need voices with character, not just like flat, just mush. That's why people always are like, "Oh, why don't you like it?" I don't like the vocals. Well, vocals are probably the most important thing for me in a band.
Yeah, they're very important for most bands.
So if I'm bored or irritated by your vocals, I'm not gonna like it. And it's like, how come you don't like that band? This band's great. They sound just like them, or they're in the same style. And I'm like, bored by the vocals. Sorry. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode. Unless you have any final thoughts.
Nope.
All right. Well, if you follow us on all forms of social media, we are at Punklotto Pod. All the apps. I'm not listing them all anymore. Just figure it out. We're there. We're on pretty much all of them. Give us a rating. Yeah, not on TikTok. But what's a podcast gonna do on TikTok? Oh, well, we're not filming ourselves and like chopping them up and We do actually record ourselves doing these, but
not gonna be interesting to look at though.
No one wants to look at that. We're just sitting in front of our computers. punklottopod@gmail.com. Voicemail line 202-688-PUNK. And give us a rating or a review on iTunes. We haven't had a new rating on iTunes or a new review on iTunes in a long time. So I keep saying iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get them. All right. Thank you all so much. And we will talk to you later.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.